Hi everyone, welcome to Talking Tech. I'm your host, Caroline Hill, and today we're going to have a product demo from Reese Hodkinson, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at Definely. Hi Reese.
Caroline, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. So many of you will know Definely. So Definely helps you to create, draft and review legal documents in Word. Their USP is one place, one tool. Today we're going to be looking at Definely's knowledge management solution, Vault, their drafting tool, Draft, legal proofreading solution, Proof. It's kind of handy that they've all got what it does on the tin names. I like that a lot. So to introduce Reese, so Reese is going to be giving us a demo of all of those tools, and I'm going to be asking some questions as we go. But to introduce Reese first up, so as I said, Reese is Chief Revenue Officer. Started your career as a trainee at Baker McKenzie in South Africa. Then in 2018, moved to the UK, where you obtained an MBA from Cambridge. And that was where you met Namdi, who's the co-founder of Definely and CEO. And so it's said that you, on seeing the pain point that Definely solves for, you immediately looked to join Definely, and you're responsible for sales, customer success, and ensuring Definely's commercial objectives are achieved. Tell us real quick about, so they've got an interesting backstory, so just tell us real quick about that, and just in case anyone's not familiar.
Sure. So, and thank you very much. That's a very kind introduction. So Fergus and Namdi were Freshfields lawyers, and whilst the pain point was something that we all experienced when we were practicing, it was very exaggerated for Fergus, mainly because he's visually impaired. So at the time, he was one of the few registered blind solicitors practicing in the City of London. Fergus only has his peripheral vision. And so what would happen working in the leverage finance team at Freshfields is he would have to review these complex 250 page agreements on about 700% Zoom. And for anyone who's just tried to review a complex agreement on normal Zoom, it's a nightmare having to switch back and forth between clauses, definitions across a transaction document suite. And so really the first prototype that Namdi built was built solely for the intention of just making Fergus more efficient in his day-to-day job. But Namdi always says, by solving for those edge cases, we captured the middle. And so we very quickly realized that, hey, this is really a solution for every lawyer practicing. And being good capitalists, we decided then to take the product to market, and we've had a pretty decent run of success since then, which I think is mainly attributable to the pain point that we solve for.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I know Ferguson. He's spoken at a conference that I ran, and he's amazing. It's a really great story. And you're obviously working with some really great firms, which is many of which are in the public domain. So just let's dive in. I've got some questions, and I think you're going to give me an opportunity to ask questions as we go. But if you could just share screen, I'd love to see the demo.
Perfect. I know I've done enough demos to know that people want to dive right into the weeds. So before I do share my screen, just to really help frame the workflows that Definely solves for. So we started with the single product draft when we first launched about 5 years ago. We then have built out a number of products, 3 of which I'm going to be focusing on today. So we have our Vault product, which is Precedent search, allowing you to surf clauses, definitions from your DMS or contract repository within Microsoft Word. Our Draft product, which has always been our flagship product and USP, and then our proofreading solution. And the way we've always thought about a lawyer's workflow, and you're going to have to bear with me on this, is very similar to how a sculptor would go around creating a particular sculpture, right? So if you get commissioned to create a specific work of art, the first thing the sculptor is going to need to do is go and find that raw material, be it the bronze, be it the granite, be it the ice, whatever you're using to create that particular sculpture. Once you've got that raw materials, you need to essentially craft it into something that's fit for purpose. So you need to chip away at it, you need to refine it, you need to make sure that it actually fits whatever it is that you've been asked to create. As soon as you finish doing that, what you're going to want to do as a sculptor is you're going to want to polish it, you're going to want to take it to a gallery, shine some pretty lights on it, make sure that it's ultimately the best reflection of yourself as an artist. And how lawyers go around creating, reviewing, and editing contracts is very similar. I get briefed on a particular matter. I want to go find the best starting point, previous clauses, previous definitions, the best template that I can use to kickstart that particular transaction. But once I've started that process, I'm going to go through multiple different iterations, multiple different negotiations, each time fine-tuning that contract to make it more and more fit for the purpose of that particular matter. And then obviously it goes without saying, at the end, I'm going to want to make sure I haven't introduced any silly errors before I send it either to the client or up the chain within my law firm. So just to provide a bit of a framework, I'll signpost to that sort of narrative as I walk throughout the demo. But as promised, let me share my screen and kick right off.
I always like a good metaphor.
I know, it's always a good part of the storytelling.
Yeah.
Part of my job. So what you can see in front of you is a very standard legal document. I've got my definition section, I've got my operative provisions, I've got my boilerplates, and I've got my schedules and appendices there too. Now, let's just say I've got started on this particular transaction, and what I want to do is I want to start introducing some clauses from my DMS or from previous work that I've done. The first thing that you would do is just simply come here and perform a scan using Definely. So you'll see we embed ourselves in Microsoft Word. It's always been important for us that we meet lawyers where they are. Ultimately, if you want to drive adoption and drive usage, trying to get lawyers outside of Microsoft Word is starting with an uphill battle. I'm not locked out of the contract whilst that scan takes place, but in any event, you'll see that doesn't really matter because the scan only takes a matter of seconds. Once the scan is complete, what I can now do is I can start searching for clauses, I can search for definitions, or I can bring up entire documents. So Definely will integrate with your document management system, whether it's NetDocuments, iManage, or SharePoint. I can simply come here and I can say, you know what, I'm looking for a calculation of interest provision. This is just a very simple example. I hit this search button, and Definely is now going to go surface those results for you from your contract repository. Not only that, but we will give you other indicators. So we will tell you if a document is frequently used, but we'll also tell you if a document is from your gold standard. So this gives your knowledge management team the ability to create that knowledge and make sure that those approved gold standard templates are surfacing at the top of this list for your lawyers or end users. I want to use this particular provision. I can simply come here, I hit this insert clause button, and what I'm now able to do is just pull across that particular provision into the document that I'm working. Something that's unique to Definely, again, this is because we own multiple products in this workflow stack, is we also will automatically identify for you any potential undefined terms that you're going to be introducing into this document by virtue of inserting that clause. And we're actually going to allow you to insert the definitions into the definition section alongside the insertion of the clause itself. I can always highlight this inserted text as yellow. I hit this insert clause button, and that clause is now seamlessly carried across from my document management system into the particular clause or agreement that I'm working on. The second big use case with respect to these precedent search products is also the ability for me to find similar clauses than the one in front of me from my knowledge management bank or whatever it might be, and be able to very quickly compare those differences. So let's say, for example, I'm not holding the pen on this particular contract. I receive it from the other side, and I want to understand how this particular provision might differ from how it would look if we had drafted it. I can simply come here, I highlight this clause and hit this Find Similar button. Definely has an embedded semantic search functionality that will go find the most similar provision in your document management system. And then what we will allow you to do is simply come here, hit this Compare All button. And what you're now able to do is very simply run a red line against what's in front of you and what is in that particular document management system as well. You can always filter by all of the metadata that you capture within your DMS. So I want to search for a particular definition or a clause, but I want to select by client, I want to select by author, I want to select a particular subfolder within my DMS, or I only want to look for gold standard results. We allow you to really curate your search using this Definely Vault. I've gone through that very quickly. Again, it's really just to give people a flavor for our Definely Vault product. Any questions, any observations based on what I've shown there before I move on to the draft product?
Yeah, thank you. So it's interesting focusing on the on the gold standard. So one of the challenges with semantic search, particularly in the space of the DMS, is the firm's concerns around quality control, and how, how do they make sure that they're not returning? The DMS is a minefield, really, isn't it? How, just tell us a little bit more about how the gold standard works in terms of preventing people from using either out of date or sort of unapproved content.
It's a great question, and I think the power of these products is also in the power of how you set up your DMS or think about it. So there are a few ways when we focused on implementing these products that we try to think about the document management system or the knowledge management structure to yield the best results. So first and foremost is you're not just wanting to filter just by gold standard. So we want to also sort by what we call relevance. So that would be which clauses were last edited, how similar is the agreement in which the clause sits in your DMS to the agreement in front of you? Are there similarities between things like governing law, type of document, real estate, finance, private equity, whatever it might be? That gold standard, that is actually set by the knowledge management team. So what it allows them to do is to point to a subset of folders or templates and say, these are the gold standard of this particular firm. Mm-hmm. And then they have the comfort that that's always going to be surfaced at the top of the result. So we're not necessarily taking a guess at what is gold standard, because that firm, that knowledge management team knows a lot better than us. But at least we then making sure we prioritize those results for the end user.
That's interesting, yeah, because obviously at the moment a lot of firms will just want to point to that. Yeah, thanks for that. So the gold standard is the sort of the curated knowledge set that a lot of people now are only exposing their tool to. But that's interesting still, that you can then within the wider DMS curate, and that so that you can make sure that people are just. I do speak to a lot of firms, and it's a real concern, for them, as to what's being surfaced. So that's really interesting. The second question, just lastly before you move on,
cool.
It's around the word side of things, actually, around the fact that this is surfaced all in one place. It's great. As a former lawyer, I still remember some of the pain points myself, so it's great to have it all in one place. People talk about the toolbar being very crowded. Is this something that people are concerned about, having it all here?
Well, so I think the big point here is, we always say our biggest competition isn't necessarily like the other vendors in our space. It's actually competing for real estate on the Microsoft Word ribbon. At the end of the day, you don't want your Microsoft Word ribbon looking like a Christmas tree or an airplane cockpit, right? Because it makes it hard to cut through the noise. Yeah. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons why a lot of the companies do decide to kind of come to us, is because we solve for multiple different pain points with one plugin, right? So obviously you have our Precedent search tool. There are other tools in the market, but they are single providers. A firm would then still need to come to us to get our draft tool, because we're the only company in the market that provides that draft solution. And then they would either come to us for our proofreading tool, or they would need to go to another proofreading solution. So in that instance, that would be 3 different plugins. It's 3 different support tickets, 3 different pricing negotiations. And so ultimately what you want to do is go to the least amount of vendors to solve for the wider amount of workflows, which is why it's so important for us that we can solve for these adjacent workflows within a single plugin.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, that'd be great. And I suppose that's a good segue into draft as well.
Yes. No, fantastic. So I've now managed to find some of the precedent information that I need to start off on this contract. But realistically, once I've done that, this contract is starting to really reflect a patchwork of different clauses, different defined terms from multiple different documents, right? And I now need to curate it into something that matches the factual matrix of the matter that I'm working on. And that's really where our draft product comes into its own. So as I said, we're the only company in the market that offers this draft product. And what it is at its core is, if I'm any person reviewing this agreement and I'm sitting in clause 13.9, and all I want to do is simply read these 7 sentences, that's almost impossible for me to do without having to consistently navigate away from that clause. And that's because I need to understand the meaning of utilization, facility, clause 4.2, commitments, base currency amount, clause 13.9, lenders, and so on and so forth. And so the main tools that lawyers currently use is some combination of multiple monitors, split screen, or using Control F. But the big problem is that these definitions are even further defined with respect to other definitions and clause references. So with definedly, I want to understand the meaning of base currency amount. I simply double click, and the meaning of that term as it is defined in my contract is now automatically showed for me in the definee side panel. And importantly, I never have to navigate away from the clause that I'm actually trying to review. Not only that, but I can now access all of this nested or embedded information. So I can see what clause 6.8 means. I can see what letter of credit means. And you'll see how all of that information that I need to understand what this clause is telling me is neatly stacked for me in this breadcrumb trail on the right-hand side. Not only that, but I see something within the definition of letter of credit that I want to amend. Again, what I don't need to do now is go 40 pages away from the clause that I'm on to make that amendment. I hit this amend button, it brings up the split screen. I can very quickly make whatever changes it is that I want. And I hit that remove split button. What I've now managed to do is update something 40 pages away with the simple click of a button. And you'll see how that change has automatically been reflected in the right-hand side. Just because lawyers like to make this problem that much more complex for themselves, very often contracts will talk to other contracts. So something might say, terms defined, but terms capitalized but not defined in this contract have the meaning given to them in the shareholders agreement, whatever it might be. And so now I'm having to flip between multiple different documents just to understand the meaning of a single provision. What I can do with define is just come to the link documents button here. I can choose to link a single document, a reference within a document, or if I want to link to 20 different documents, I can. And what define is automatically going to do is map out the relationships between all of these different agreements. Once that linking is complete, any terms here, such as margin, which are used in this document but defined elsewhere, I can now double click on them, see their meaning as they are defined in an entirely separate agreement. Again, without me actually having to ever leave this particular provision that I'm working on. The last key feature that I want to talk through on our active drafting functionality is the inserting of a definition. So let's say I'm working within this particular document. I introduce a new term, and this is going to be an undefined term if I don't actually go and define it. Now, when I was a lawyer, I used to write down all of the undefined terms that I had introduced on a separate piece of paper so that I would know to go back to them at the end and to give them the definition. What I can do with definely is I simply highlight the term I want to define. I hit this define term button. We bring up this insert definition window. What we'll do is match the keyword to what the contract that you're working on. We will automatically identify the definition section and automatically place it in the correct alphabetical order with the formatting used in this particular contract. Not only that, but because we've got our Vault or DMS integration, what I'm also now able to do is to say, hey, have I ever used a definition for this term before? So I can hit the search definitions button and we'll say, we've identified a few definitions for this particular term from your DMS. And what I'm now able to do is just select that definition and introduce it into this particular provision. I hit insert definition, and now that's automatically loaded for me into the document that I'm currently working on. I'm going to talk about some of our reporting functionality after this, but before I do so, any questions on what you've seen there?
I think in light of time, actually, I'll just save. I've got a couple of questions for the end, but more general. But I mean, this is in terms of the time saving. I can see just how much time this would save. Having navigated many contracts and flipped around, obviously the size of them is quite something. Sometimes, for these long contracts, having to navigate. I mean, obviously you have multiple screens. I have like NASA size screens. I'm sure most people do with their setup, but yeah, having that split screen is so helpful.
Exactly, and just the ability to sit within a single provision and everything you need to understand it being brought to you, as opposed to the expectation that the lawyer needs to go fetch that information themselves.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So through 3 reports. So our definition report, our reference report, and then lastly, our proofreading report, which, as I said, really sits at the end of this workflow when I'm trying to polish up a document. So what our definition report enables you to do is it allows you to see all of your defined terms in your contract. So not only do I want to see what accounting principle means, but actually what I want to do is see where it's used in my contract, as well as how it's used in each of those underlying provisions. Sometimes definitions can carry quite a lot of substantive weight, and I want to track how that definition is used throughout this particular document. Those pesky undefined terms. So again, these are terms which have been introduced but not yet defined. A few things that are novel for us with respect to undefined terms is if you've linked a document, then it's not going to show up as an undefined term because it is defined in a linked document. Again, that severely reduces the number of false positives being identified here. But importantly, we also allow firms to grey list terms. So things like Deeds Registry, a lot of the firms we work with send us a list of terms that they don't want to appear in this report, and we'll make that bespoke for every single customer that we work with. So I can come here, I can see an undefined term, I can decide to insert a definition for it using that insert definition feature. Again, I can pull a definition for that from my DMS system, but I can also choose to hide a term. So it might be that in my particular practice area, a term doesn't require, it's got an industry-wide accepted meaning, and I can simply hide that term, in which case this list is going to improve for me over time. And then the unused terms. So these are my terms that have been defined because I started with a template, but they're actually no longer used in the body of the document itself. And again, I can just simply delete that from where I am in this report. Moving on to our next report, our reference report, I'm just going to open a separate document to talk through this. So what our reference report is essentially an interactive table of contents. So it allows you to access any section, clause, annex, article, or schedule from the document that you're working on. So I come here to the reference report, and I can see, have we agreed to any particular indemnity provisions? I can just search for indem or indemnity. I can bring up those provisions very easily in the right-hand side. The two most used features within our reference report is if I'm negotiating, let's say, a particular rider, and I just want to export these two provisions to discuss in a particular meeting, I simply select them, I come here, I hit Export Original References, and what Define is now automatically going to do is carry across those specific provisions into a standalone document. We'll maintain the numbering of the document that you're working on, but importantly, what we will also do is carry across all of those definitions that are used with respect to those clauses that you're carrying across. So if you just give it a second, because I know this is a very busy clause, so it loads almost every single definition, but you'll see in terms of looking at the output, I get the clauses that I've selected, and then I'll get all of those definitions used alongside them. So here are the clauses I've exported, and then you can see here are all of the definitions used with respect to those clauses as well. And then the most recent feature which we've dropped, which a lot of people are very excited about, is our automatically creating of issues lists. So I come here, I can hit extract changes, I hit all comments and markup. We automatically going to create an issues list for that user, detailing every single red line that's been made in the document, every comment that's associated with that, and then give them the opportunity to send it to the client for a response, or indeed to give their response as well. So this can sometimes take an associate or someone in our team 10 hours to conduct this task.
That's instead of them having to obviously just read through the contract, I presume. So is that what they normally do? To be fair, I ended up in litigation, not corporate. So is that something that would habitually be done by the associates?
Currently, what they would do is they would walk through a 300-page document, and then they would manually pull all of this information across into a similar table. So they would want to send this to the client because, if you're on the 10th version, you don't just want to be sending the entire document to the client. You want to say, look, here are just the changes that have been made. Let's just talk through any edits in this particular contract. So currently, these tables are just done manually in both law firms and in-house teams. That's
really good. Yeah. And they can just respond on that right-hand side, the client. Do they just sort of tick it to show that they've dealt with it? That's so.
Yeah. So what they would just do is they would come here and they would say, we can accept this or we can't accept this. We need to discuss as the law firm. You can say, this is not market standard, and we would push back here. So it's just a single table where you can discuss those changes.
Okay, thanks.
And then, conscious of time, I just want to walk through our proofreading functionality. So really, if you go back to the sculptor analogy, I've now finished curating this document, making it fit for purpose, but obviously I want to make sure that I haven't introduced any common errors into the document by virtue of spending many late night working on a 300-page agreement. So we pick up all of your common proofreading issues, definition issues, undefined terms, unused terms, define, not capitalize, out of alphabetical order. With respect to every single issue, we will allow you to obviously identify where it is in the document, but we'll also just allow you to fix it. So if I hit this Fix All button, we'll automatically place all of your definitions into the correct alphabetical order for you. We do all of your cross-references. So if I have those broken cross-references and I need to insert a cross-reference, I can simply come here. I hit this fix button. We'll actually show you the cross-reference that we think you're trying to refer to. So I can say, is this substantively accurate? And you'll see here, I just come here, I hit this insert button, and I've now automatically inserted that hyperlink for me. We also pick up common editing mistakes. We'll pick up incorrect quotation marks, spacing issues, numbers and wording. So if I say £100,000 in numbers, but not £100,000 in words, we'll pick up those mismatches for you. And then we also allow you to filter your contract by category. So I want to see references to all monetary amounts. I want to see references to all legislation, geographic locations, any special characters or blobs that might have been introduced into the document. So that's a very quick overview. We do, as is the case with a lot of solutions these days, have the ability for you to query your document. So this is just a very quick example of if I want to say, you know, what service levels are imposed on the supplier. I can do so very easily within Microsoft Word. We'll pull out that answer for you. But what we'll also do is use our definely draft overlay to allow the user to very easily verify the output. So I can see here that the performance standards need to be in accordance with good industry practice. In any other output, I would just have to kind of figure out what that means. But with definely, I can simply double click and actually go and see the meaning of good industry practice to understand the size. So I covered a lot there.
Yeah.
It's hopefully a decent period of time, but hopefully that gives you an overview for sort of the workflows that we own and where definely sits in the.
With the you just touched on the assistant. So the references that you've made to Gen AI recently have been within the context of the virtual assistant. Is that right? And is that just, do you sort of, it's just for application at the end as a sort of a part of the editing process? Is that right?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? And if you look at, we've been very careful not just to update our URL to .ai and try jump on the bandwagon, right? Whether it's generative AI, whether it's normal software, whatever it might be, it's the first thing is use case discovery, like what are the problems we solve? So summarization and the ability to query a document is no doubt useful, but there still remain quite low value tasks within the organization, right? A lot of the time when law firms or anyone's getting briefed on a particular matter, it's because there's no historic precedent for it, right? And generative AI is very good at telling you about historic precedent, but you still need that lawyer's value judgment based on the information ahead of them. So really, we see that virtual assistant summarization as table stakes offerings. What we're really excited about is what we can do on the agentic side of things, which I think is where Definey is very well positioned to be a leader in this market.
So that's on the roadmap.
Correct. So, you know, one of the big things with respect to the agentic world is obviously the more of the workflow you own, the more chance you have to deploy better agents, right? Agents are merely go-betweens between the end user and the information that they need to complete the task, right? If we own that information landscape, we can allow agents to be much more effective in completing a task. So one of the big risks that we see is that if you have a tech stack that's got a lot of point providers, they are not going to allow agents that aren't their own agents to access their software to complete tasks. And that means that you're not going to allow the end user to get the most utility or productivity out of a particular agent. We will be one of the few companies that are well positioned where you can say, hey, go find me a particular provision that deals with these particular items. When you introduce that clause into my contract, please make sure that you switch the formatting across, introduce any undefined terms, and can you automatically make sure that there are no broken cross-references when you do that? The agent's not a proofreading tool. The agent's not a drafting tool. The agent's not a semantic search tool. It needs access to semantic search tools. It needs access to proofreading tools. It needs access to our draft tool in order to do that. And we are one of the only providers that would be able to give it access. So that's why we're very excited about what we're building. It's
a really good point. I think that, you know, there's a lot of talk about agentic AI, and you know, I do think that's going to be a huge problem. It'd be interesting to see to what extent and in what time period people are comfortable with true agentic AI workflow. Yeah. I can see where this would fit in. I think that for a foreseeable future, there will be an element continued element of the human in the loop. So it will probably start to map out. I can see you guys going here, like you start to map out, you know, the process so that it does it, but you can actually follow it, and you almost have an approval process. And whether that makes it agentic or not is a curious question, but I can see why within your platform it would be much easier than having to connect and integrate with lots of different systems.
Exactly. And then that gets overly complex. And I think it's a great point as well. It's that, you know, you want the lawyers already working in the workflow. You want them already kind of using solutions to solve for those workflows. Like, we have been in the market for 5 years. Like, we have a lot of companies using these products. We know there's tangible return on investment for these solutions. And then we can experiment on top of that with what agentic looks like. We're not just trying to throw an agentic AI project at something that doesn't have very well thought out solving for use cases, solving for workflows, and a track record of delivering software that does that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, it's such a pleasure chatting to you.
Yes,
thank you so much, and thank you for demoing that product. I was going to ask if a sort of a complete sort of last curveball question, but you work with some really big firms. What would be the biggest learning, do you think, in terms of some of the, you know, new product developments that you've taken directly from firms? Is it possible to say that, you know, in terms of what have you learned from working? I'm writing a lot at the moment about partnerships and the two-way knowledge sharing. Is it possible to say what the biggest learning has been from working with some of the firms that you work with?
Yeah, so I think so there's a lot, right? So I mean, like, our issues list feature that I demoed, like, that wasn't our idea, right? That was an idea of a customer, which we then built, which has now like led a lot of growth for us, and we're very thankful to them for that. I think the biggest thing when you start as a company, a lot of us have been lawyers ourselves, right? So we were very focused on solving for the lawyer problem, and then go to the innovation person or go to the technical person and say, your lawyers want this product. And I think early legal tech was very much focused on that, right? I think law firms and enterprises we work with have become much more complex organizations, right? It's not just about what are the needs of the end user. It's also what is the whole intricate architecture that sits behind this, and how do we unlock the data? How do we make sure the data is in a format that everything can understand and talk to it? And I think since we've had more of those conversations and we're starting to understand how deep this goes, you know, sometimes solving for the lawyer problem could be the surface level side of it, right? But you have to get that architecture right. So on our Vault product, a lot of our time is spent talking about how do we get that DMS where we need it to be? How can we show you with other firms what they've done to get their DMS structured in a way that kind of gives you the metadata and the labeling to make use of this tool? Whereas maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, it would have just been like, but your lawyers want, right? Now we're having much more technical discussions around, okay, let's get the enterprise set up for success. And then these products are basically just the conduit once that's set up to driving the lawyers to the product itself. And that's just something that we've had to do, is obviously how deep that architecture goes within these large law firms and organizations.
Okay, yeah, an interesting point. Well, look, it's been such a pleasure chatting. Thanks for that. Always like to end on a curveball. So really interesting. I think people will really find a lot of value in the demo. I certainly have. And Rhys, thank you so much for your time.
Cool. Thank you so much, Caroline.